Now we talk about uniqueness and consistency. We'll start with a theorem. Theorem 2 from chapter 1. And it says a linear system is consistent if and only the last column is not a pivot column. And this is what we saw in the example from earlier, this one. See, you can see that this last column's a pivot column. It has a pivot in it. And we see that it's inconsistent. We have a hole in the fabric of math, 0 equals 1. So this means the system is inconsistent. So it is consistent if the last column is not a pivot column. It's inconsistent if the last column is a pivot column. So let's look at a few more examples of this. So let's say in this example, dot represents a pivot and a star represents a number. And let's classify each matrix as consistent with infinite solutions, consistent with a unique solution, or inconsistent. So let's look at our matrices here. So the first matrix is this matrix. Put some stars here. So this is consistent. This is consistent because we don't have the last column as a pivot column. And furthermore, it's an infinite number of solutions because we have a free variable. And you can see that as a free variable because there's no pivot associated with the third. So if you think of this as x1, x2, x3, the third variable, x3, is a free variable. Doesn't have a pivot associated with it. Let's look at another matrix. Let's look at a matrix where we have a pivot, 0, star, 0, a pivot, star, and 0, 0, pivot. Okay, so this is a problem. This is inconsistent. Because that last column is a pivot column. Another way of saying this is we have a bunch of zeros and then a non-zero number, and that means 0 is 1, or 0 is whatever that non-zero number is, and that's inconsistency. One last example. This is oops, didn't mean that to be a star. This is going to be a 0 here. Okay, so this one has one variable and it's consistent because it doesn't have a pivot column as its last column. So this is consistent and there's no free variables. There's only one variable and it's a pivot associated with a pivot, so this is one solution. Or another way of saying this is it's a unique solution. So once again, just to recap here, an infinite solution is associated with free variables. Inconsistency is associated with a 0 and then number row, and a unique solution is associated with no free variables.